Hello, and thank you for joining us today as we celebrate the 20th anniversary of Epiphany. It's kind of hard to believe it's 20 years. It doesn't seem that long, but quite an accomplishment, I would say. This is the man who was the vision behind the whole of the project, Eli Parker. And my name's Tim Snider, president of the winery, and happy to be with you here today to talk a little bit about, think back and celebrate a little bit of 20 years of a real accomplishment. When I think about the origins of Epiphany, I remember a couple things specifically, but I'd like to hear kind of what your memories are of Epiphany.
Well, geez, I'm getting to a point now where 20 years, I'm getting kind of aged. I don't know if I can remember that far back, to be honest with you. I don't think I had any gray hair back then.
No, me neither.
I was at an early point in my wine education career just struck by Rhone varietals specifically, and I had an opportunity to travel a little bit, spent some time in the Rhone Valley and in Australia, and just really fell in love with Syrah and Grenache Blanc. And we were making a lot of those varieties. Well, I shouldn't say a lot of them. In the early days, we basically had Syrah and Viognier.
Yeah.
That's kind of where we started, but my passion for expanding that portfolio started to grow in the mid and late 90s, and shortly after my dad, Tim's father-in-law, purchased Camp 4 in the St. Ynez Valley. We had an opportunity to expand the Rhone holdings in the vineyard, and that's really where things started to take off. We were doing a lot of experimentation in the cellar and had some great new varieties to experiment with, and Epiphany was just sort of born out of that experimentation and expansion of the Rhone portfolio.
Yeah, I remember you talking about all of these different, more esoteric Rhone varieties that were in the ground and coming online, and you were super excited about working with them in very small, limited quantities, but a lot, like you said, a lot of experimentation. And the program really just sort of evolved. It took on a life of its own, with a real discovery element, as I recall. Especially for me, I wasn't familiar back then with even all of these different grapes. And what's interesting is we were talking about how, prior to this, how many of them actually, the experiments ended up pulling forward and are still part of the program today.
It's really neat to see how the Epiphany label has evolved. We started with, in the sort of earliest years of Epiphany, basically a red Rhone blend that we're going to have an opportunity to try here in a little bit. Obviously we had some blending components for that, but we slowly started to expand and added things like Counois and Cinsault and Carignan, and on the white side a little bit of Grenache Blanc and Roussanne, and that really allowed us to the building blocks to experiment with some really fun and interesting blends that still to this day are kind of the backbone of the Epiphany program.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another thing that's been really rewarding over the years as the program continues to develop is, well, the majority of this in the early days was sourced from Camp 4 vineyard, which was a great vineyard that you all planted, and we still use fruit from Camp 4. I think what's been interesting is that we've moved a lot of these varieties over to Rodney's vineyard, and as Rodney's vineyard has grown and developed, and there's opportunities for some grafting and redevelopment in Rodney's vineyard. We've put some of these varieties on the home ranch right now, and I think there's just something that's pretty special about how Epiphany has become more and more rooted to the home ranch, the first vineyard that you and Ashley and your folks planted. And to me, there's sort of a full circle here, where this program is now very much Rodney's vineyard dominant, and frankly, I think the fruit quality continues to just get better and better and better as it goes.
Well, I think Camp 4 was a great spot, but I have to say, in all honesty, I think Rodney's is a bit superior just in terms of soil and climate. It's just a skosh less, is that proper?
Yeah.
Grammatically,
Sure.
less hot.
Sure.
And so, we're able to sort of maintain and achieve great juice chemistries. And at the end of the day, that's pretty much what it's all about. You got to have good fruit to make good wine, and Rodney's is a great place for growing, amazing quality fruit.
Absolutely. Well, in celebration of 20 years, we are going to be, we are releasing several mini verticals of some of our favorite wines. Revelation, Petit Syrah from Rodney's Vineyard, and then going off the ranch and reviewing Syrahs from Bien Nacido, just a wonderful vineyard in Santa Maria Valley. So we're glad that you're going to come along with us as we explore these mini verticals. Thanks so much for sticking with us. We hope that you're going to be around as we continue the next 20 years. Cheers.
Cheers to that.
So we're going to dive into a mini vertical here of Syrah, one of the hallmarks of Epiphany, from a vineyard that has a storied past and is really probably recognized as one of the most fantastic places to grow grapes, and a wide variety of grapes, in Santa Barbara County, and specifically in Santa Maria Valley. And that's Bien Nacido in the Santa Maria Valley. And Eli, you kind of forged this relationship way back when, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about the history of Epiphany and Fess Parker and the Miller family of Bien Nacido.
Sure. So the Miller family established Bien Nacido, I think, back in the early 70s. It's an absolutely amazing vineyard. The bulk of it is all south-facing, cool climate, sits on what's called the Tepisque Bench, just a little east of the Santa Maria Valley. And they're very fortunate in that, it's just warm enough that they can actually grow some pretty amazing Syrah. Bien Nacido really made its name for Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, but when they started to experiment with Syrah back in the, I'm going to say, late 80s, early 90s, they found that they could actually grow and produce some pretty amazing fruit. Our first kind of opportunity to work with them for some Syrah was probably in 93, 94. They planted a block for us. And unfortunately, that block is no longer in existence with respect to Syrah, but you were able to talk them into a little bit of fruit from one of their other blocks. Is it block 11, I think?
Yep, I think it sounds right.
This Bien Nacido Syrah is from that block 11, and it's really stunning, pretty amazing stuff.
Yeah, as we start to dig into these wines, and we have 14, 15, and 16 vintage, 2014, 15, 16, we don't go back as far on with Bien Nacido because there was that pause, like you suggested, in our ability to, or the access we had to Syrah from this fantastic vineyard. But talk a little bit, if you will, the differences that we see in cool climate Syrah like this versus maybe a slightly warmer climate like what folks would be familiar with our Rodney's Vineyard or Hampton Vineyard or even Stagecoach Vineyard in the Epiphany lineup.
Sure. So, with cooler climate Syrah, you're going to obviously see a bit more acidity in the wine, a little bit more structure. Typically, the flavors can sort of run a little bit more to sort of the spicy, peppery end of the spectrum, but still with nice black fruit character.
Yeah.
It's just, I don't even know how to come up with a good analogy. It's sort of Syrah in its most refined form, I guess you would say.
That's a good way of putting it, actually. Yeah. I personally tend to gravitate towards some of these wines. Maybe part of the reason why we chose this as one of our 20th anniversary re-releases. But why don't we taste these? So we have 2014 vintage, the 15 and 16, And there's really an outlier in here, vintage-wise. One vintage that kind of stood out for a specific reason, and maybe you can talk us through that.
Sure. Yeah, for those of you that live in California and can remember a few years ago, specifically 2015, was a very difficult year from a grape growing standpoint. One of the hottest years I can ever remember, it was an interesting challenge to try and get the fruit sort of through the growing season. I mean, literally, you don't ideally want to be watering your fruit in the middle of harvest, kind of, or not harvest, but coming up to harvest, but it was the only way to keep the berries from turning to raisins. But it's amazing. I mean, this particular wine, I mean, I think other wines in our portfolio didn't fare that kind of those harsh conditions. This one actually is drinking pretty darn nice.
It really is. 2015, we kind of knew we were in for it. It was the culmination of 5 years of drought. It was the shortest, warmest, driest vintage on record in Santa Barbara County. And when essentially you're going through January and February, and it feels like spring. That's great for your golf game, but it's not great for the grapes and the vines and the development. But the team really did a great job, I think, in a lot of handwork, a lot of good picking decisions and making those calls early, even when they seem maybe earlier than they should. And I think that the hallmark of Bien Nacido, and the 15 shows it, but maybe the 14 and 16 even more so, is to me freshness. These wines have power and those dark fruits and that spicy character that you were talking about that's really good. But all of these wines have lift and freshness as well.
Definitely. They're, even though the oldest is 6 years old at this point, there's a really youthful still a really youthful character too. In 2014 and 15 and 16. For sure. When I tasted 2016, if we jump kind of down over to the end, one of the things that this kind of, to me, has some nuances that are a little bit reminiscent of Northern Rum, which I really like. A little bit of almost that kind of slight black olive type of character. Little Hermitage. And so these are wines, I think, too, that while some of our library releases and the mini verticals that we're going to be running through are definitely older, that should be kind of a drink now type of thing. To me, these wines are demonstrating that while they're drinking great right now, the sweet spot really for a lot of these Syrahs and Syrah-based blends is probably, we're starting to see probably out more towards 8 to 12 years, and maybe even longer. In some instances, we have enough experience with a vineyard to have empirical data. In this instance, I mean, it feels like 8, 10 years, 12 years, pretty easy. It's kind of neat, and for those of you that maybe have come to some of our seminars at the winery, and Tim and Blair and I will get up on stage, and I've said before, it was frustrating in the early years of the winery because people would ask you 5 years into this, well, how long will this age, or when should I drink it? And quite candidly, there is no response to that. You don't know. But to be able to go back now with 30 years of history and taste a lot of these wines, that have been aging for 20 plus years, I'm really super happy with the ageability of the wines from Epiphany and Fess Parker. But these Syrahs from Bien Nacido, properly stored, I mean, you could have a great experience with this 10, 15 years down the road. Well, let's plan on doing it. Definitely. All right, and we hope that you'll join us too. Thank you very much for your time. We'll look forward to seeing you in Los Olivos or somewhere down the road when conditions permit. Thank you for spending a little time as we celebrate our 20th anniversary. And Eli, cheers, congratulations on that.